Welcome back, y'all. So, yeah, it's been a while. Back from my hiatus. Although I am moving, which will explain a lot of this, so there will be some changes. This sort of backdrop here, as presently shown, will cease to exist. However, I decided to do this contest for Pat at Ground Zero Salem. I think most of you subscribed, at least to this channel, would already be very familiar with Pat. And I am more than happy to enter my hat in the ring, along with a lot of other people, for this particular contest. The thing is that I'm a very late entry, and it's very cool that there's been a lot of people already giving their opinions on their selected albums. So the idea for this contest is that albums that you either have loved, liked in the beginning, and have changed your opinion over time, so maybe vice versa, albums that you hated and now like, and so on and so forth. So I will be showing some of my own selections along with this. So I hope I win as usual, but you know what? I do all this stuff for sake of the community and all in good fun, as usual. And it's also just cool to do something like this for Pat. I almost see Pat as sort of like a more well put together, more evolved form of me. More just better overall. Case in point. All right, enough of that. So let's see what we got. Okay, first up. So just to get this out of the way, I think I only saw one other person show this band. That was Stormwind79 James. Talk about, yes, 6 Feet Under. Although he showed a later album, and his take on it was that it was a band he can't understand why people can't get into. But, you know, to each their own, right? And so I decided to go with the debut, because I haven't seen anybody else also shown this, but this album, believe it or not, had a big impact on me because I was just that right age. So, you know, this came out in 1995, and I must have been about 15, going on 16, something like that, when I got wind of this one. But by then, you know, I was already listening to The Bleeding. And, you know, Chris Barnes was pretty much at his, I don't want to say if he was at his prime, at his peak. Some people, that's also debatable. But, you know, but coming from something like this to this was very jarring. But that said, we're just starting to get into Obituary. And so now that Chris Barnes is in the news for in not such a good light very recently, this came to mind. So I figured this would be a cool one to kind of talk about. I think that if everybody were to rank 6 Feet Under's albums, for those who dare to attempt that, for better or worse, I think that this particular album will probably be one of the ones that's more on the higher side as far as, you know, the more highly relegated albums. But I don't think it's a bad album. You know, you got Alan West. You know, so I kind of saw this as more of a Obituary light, per se. So not quite as developed, not quite as, you know, but I didn't know any better. You know, it was 1995, and I was just getting my teeth wet with all this, you know, death metal and everything that was going on. I was exploring. So I didn't really have a good point of reference, you know, as far as everything that was happening at the scene at the time. Well past 91, the golden years. So this was just in the period when groove metal was, you know, in full form. And, you know, you had, who the hell did you have? You know, besides Alan West, you had Terry Butler on fucking bass, man. Like, you know, oh, come on. Death, Massacre, you know, it was, quite a lineup. And I think that when Metal Blade put this out, they figured they had another superstar in their hands. You know, as far as a convenient sort of a way to fork Barnes out of Cannibal Corpse with this project and see if they had another banger. I don't know what their take on this. I mean, obviously they're still releasing albums, so clearly they're making sales regardless of what people may think of this band in general. They're putting them out; they must be selling. But this one here, I played this constantly. This was one that I know this in and out. But do I really return to this nowadays? No, not so much. And why is that? Because I think that with the later releases, it sort of stained my view of this sort of just the band in general, just as far as their entire catalog, just as a band as a whole. But with this one, you know, it's very paint by numbers, very, you know, my first death metal album kind of thing, and it's not the most brutal thing. But I think it caters to that crowd. You know, if you really love groove metal, I think that this is something that you could get into. But I'm not going to call this a bad album by a stretch. It's just very, very, very simplistic. And, you know, in comparison to the palette I have today, and then looking at this. So this is a lot of nostalgia, but, you know, there's just some other stuff that I'd rather listen to. So 6 Feet Under, for me, it's just something that I've retired. But, you know, I'll hold on to this, again, just remembering the years for what they were back in the golden 90s and my death metal development phase in my life. So, there's that. Okay, so this one is a band that I think as far as the early days and the classic death metal albums are what you call very, very sort of instrumental in the Canadian death metal scene as far as highly regarded classics. And when Blasphemy Made Flesh and None So Vile came out between 94 and 96, then in 1998 we had Whisper Supremacy by Cryptopsy. So this band out of Quebec, I think, was a pivotal thing for putting Canada on the scene as far as what kind of talent coming out of there that people can explore. So, in 1998, I was already 18, and I remember they marketed the shit out of this album. I remember seeing just flyers everywhere, and, you know, who was it? Century Media put this out. And I remember when I first listened to None So Vile, and that might have been like the year before, 97, and I was just blown away just by, I think, the technicality and just the brutality, everything that came along with it. And I was expecting more of that. I did not realize, again, I came in kind of late with the band as far as, you know, because I missed the first album. So Lord Worm was something that I was expecting here. I did not realize they had a different vocalist, Mike DeSalvo. So they got an import from the U.S., from Boston of all places. And as you guys know, Boston's a very hardcore, heavy kind of city. And we got a little bit of that influence here. So this is why I think I had a little bit of difficulty digesting this album. The technicality was there. It was still quite brutal. But the vocals were not quite as guttural, and it wasn't as, it was more shouty. You know, and I was into hardcore at the time, you know, but I was not really looking for something that was so intricate and technical. You know, I wanted more grooving, thicker, you know, just simpler riffs, more of the breakdown kind of stuff. And you had little elements of that going on here, but I think that my issue with this album when it came out, I realized that, for example, you know, Gorguts came out with Obscura in the same year. And if you want something really kind of over the top and technical and just really, really out there, you know, I think that one kind of just won up to this one in that department. You know, as far as that brutality and that kind of slammy kind of stuff, you know, again, coming out of the US, you had Suffocation. and and it's kind of sat somewhere in the middle there for me. And you know, it just did not. It was not too memorable to me. I would play this, and you know, Lord Worm was. I think he did contribute to 2 tracks here, but it wasn't enough to really keep me from returning to this very often. So I did not have a high opinion of this album back when it came out, so I kind of just ignored it for years. You know, I went back to None So Vile. Blasphemy Made Flesh, you know, I returned to it way later, and I enjoy it today. So, but as Cryptopsy released more albums, you know, Worm returned for a period there, you know, and then left again. So I remember one thing that always stuck with me, and besides all that technicality, which I did love, and, you know, my palette was starting to change, it was starting to expand, and I was getting out of the groove metal years, and, you know, I started to learn to appreciate stuff like this a little more. And even Gorguts was just too out there and strange for me. I appreciated it for what it was and what they were trying to do for expanding death metal at the time, when, you know, all those other, what you call, Scott Burns, Florida imitation bands, and the, you know, the HM2 bands, you know, I think Gorguts came out and did something quite different. And so did these guys, you know. And, but again, it's just a very strange time when this came out. I was still kind of just exploring other things. But what brought me back was the drumming. What the hell's the name? Floor Manure. Manure. I don't want to say Manure. Manure. I just love his style of drumming. And so, you know, check out Deity. He's on this project too. I think this came out 2017. You know, he's also on this. And excellent just example of just really good drumming. It just a nice mix of that technicality, but still able to kind of slow things down a bit, and for a little bit of that sort of power slammy kind of element, all kind of mixing it into one. He really adapts well with that style. And, you know, both blue, interesting enough. So, yeah, so it's Cryptopsy. So, I've returned to this then, and I have a sort of newfound appreciation for this album, but I do not kind of put this in the same sort of mantle as None So Vile, you know, and Blasphemy Made Flesh. It's just, to me, it's a different category of death metal. Even though it still has the technicality, has still some of the essence of it, it's just, I think, between the vocalists and, oh yeah, and they add another guitarist on this too. So, you know, it's just had a different kind of texture to it, just overall. So, that's my take on that. So, you know, again, I appreciate this album, and I enjoy listening to it, but it's not my favorite Cryptopsy album. But I do like it a lot more than I did when I first listened to it upon release. Okay, I think a good one to kind of segue off of Cryptopsy, I think, is I had sort of a similar kind of experience with this band as far as how they transitioned. So again, going back to the 90s, see a theme here? And as we all can agree, you know, I think between, you know, 91, 93 was a great and golden year for death metal. And then, you know, by the time, you know, 95, 96 and so forth, a lot of bands took certain directions that I think a lot of what you call the purists would not be very favorable as far as the kind of albums that bands were putting out in their catalog at the time. So, I'm talking about none other than Benediction out of the UK. So, you know, that's a band that started with, you know, Barney Greenway, and then eventually Dave Ingram took over vocals. And, you know, they pumped out classics, you know, like Subconscious Terror, Grand Leveler, and then came Transcend the Rubicon. And with my story is, I did not start out with those albums. I got to Benediction also quite late. I've heard the name around, but being that this was before Google and, you know, before, you know, everything as accessible as it is today, before YouTube. So I knew Benediction as a death metal band, but I started with the wrong album. And I did not start with what many would consider as probably the worst album, you know, arguably. So after Transcend the Rubicon came the Dreams You Dread. And that was a harsh transition to what you call the more groove metal. It had more of hardcore underpinnings. I hear like elements of propane in there. It's almost like they went to a show and go, we need to do more, something like that. At least that's what it felt like to me, going back and listening to it. But I actually started out with Grind Bastard. So again, I think this came out also in 1998. And so when I first put this on, it was something, I was not adapted to Dave Ingram's vocals. It was something that I really needed to get used to, because he did not sound like other vocalists. He had a very sort of husky take. It just very, I don't know, just deep. But at the time, you know, when someone told me aggressive and brutal, you know, I'm thinking of something like Glenn Benton. I'm thinking of something kind of more in that line. Not what I hear on this. So, you know, I hit play and I go, this isn't death metal. It's way too thrashy. You know, the riffs all reminded me like of thrash metal. It was just, and it was not tuned the way I was used to. It did not sound like Cannibal Corpse. And songs like and I did enjoy it for what it was. I mean, West of Hell is a great song, you know, on this. I just, you know, but it had I felt like it was a bit I don't know. I felt a little deceived. You know, I put this on, I'm like, being what I was pitched about this band, I did not get what I was expecting. And it was a little bit of buyer's remorse, I think, from that element, because I wanted death metal. But for what it was, you had the Hellion Electric Eye cover on this, which normally a lot of bands will probably kind of put that towards the end or whatever, and these guys kind of just put it's not a bad cover, but, you know, I'd still rather listen to the Priest version. You know, and then you had Destroyer, the Twisted Sister cover on here at the same time. She had two covers. So some people may see that as two strikes, right? Kind of a way, it suspiciously feels like you're padding the album. Almost like they had nothing and they kind of just needed to put something out. You know, I didn't have that kind of context at the time, but I was like, so I went off Benediction for a while. You know, I was like, again, I started out with the wrong album. But, you know, over time, you know, I picked up some of their albums. So, you know, I got the box set, which I'm glad, and, you know, it's got almost all their stuff. It doesn't have the Dreams You Dread. You notice is missing here. Gee, I think Nuclear Blast was just like, that might sting the catalog. Well, I'm probably just going to put these other guys in here in the meantime. But I think with this one, it's not that I didn't enjoy it. It's just that this one, I felt like I was conned, and to think that I was getting a death metal album and hearing so much about it. And I think people were referencing Transcendent Rubicon and the Grand Leveler. And, you know, it's just like how great those albums were. So I thought, let me go check them out. And this is what was new at the time. And I snagged this and hit play, and I go, this sounds nothing like what was pitched to me. What the hell, man? I don't put this on much nowadays, but again, to me, this is not a death metal album. Look at the lyrics. Look at even the damn logo. They changed that. I think Organized Chaos is when they went back to the logo. You know, think about the death metal world, man. Look at the logos. That's very telling a lot of times. Some bands can still remain consistent and change the logo, immolation, you know, but I think most of the time when a band changes their logo, they're trying to tell you something. In this case, they're kind of telling you, yeah, we're not really a death metal band during this period. We're more like a aggressive, really aggressive, harsh thrash album. But if you wanted something really harsh in a more thrash death kind of realm, I probably would have went more with the Teutonic bands during this period if you wanted something more like that. This is a very oddball one in this discography. Not quite as hardcore sounding as the Dreams You Dread, but this is more of a thrashier direction that they took. But that's just my take on it. So, this Benediction, Grind Bastard. Shit. Okay, so let's change things up a little and go to Sweden. And this album is from a band I thoroughly enjoyed their stuff. I started out with, God, must have been Discouraged Ones. You know, later went back to the more harsh vocal era. And by now you figured out I'm talking about Catatonia. So the album, Night is the New Day. And this is one I think definitely fell in that evolving opinion category for me. I was let down when this came out. This came out in 2009, and there was a bit of a hiatus between the album before this, The Great Cold Distance. The Great Cold Distance was more, to give you a bit of a context, It was probably the more groove-laden album they've ever put out. It's probably the thickest, fuzziest, heaviest in that kind of department. It sounded like it could have came out in the late '90s. Instead, it came out after Viva Emptiness with you know this one and the Great Cold. The Great Cold Distance had My Twin, which I felt like it could have easily been a Viva Emptiness album. It felt out of place in the Great Cold Distance. And as I was getting very involved in that album, I was like, okay, I kind of like this direction they're taking. It's different. I like the atmospheric side of what you call Viva Emptiness, and you know, it's just last video going down, and just to kind of just trying to adjust to that era, you know, coming from that other harsh vocal era. But I like that era, Catatonia. They were always a very moody band, and Jonas is a take on singing. You know, it kind of just puts you in that sort of somber kind of mood. You know, it's just kind of they were just that kind of band. You know, and they still are. They're still putting out stuff, and I don't visit that Catatonia much nowadays. You know, it's just, you know, and this particular era is not really what I'm looking for in a band kind of like this. I'm not saying it's bad music, but I started to notice that switch immediately when Night is the New Day came out. That said, I felt like this felt more subdued and held back. I felt like they were kind of pulling their punches. You know, they could have had more punch than what they were putting out previously, especially after the Great Cold Distance. And I thought they were going to kind of just expand on that palette and up the ante even more in that direction. Instead, they went back. They went balls out fucking atmospheric with this, and this is a grower. You know, and after this, all their albums become super grower kind of albums. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say as far as that era. And this is a transition album. I did not look at it that way at the time. I felt like this was more like they were kind of taking a bit of a break from some of their more groove, just sort of more radio rock sounding kind of stuff at the time. Not that I consider them a radio rock kind of band. You know, especially by American standards. But with this, this is an album that required a certain kind of patience, and I figured after that hiatus, I wanted more. This is not something that I was thinking Catatonia would move into with that direction. But it actually makes sense now that I think about it. You know, as a band, they had other outlets and other things going on too at the time. But with this, in proximity with everything they've released after this album, and going back to this, I actually enjoyed this quite a lot. It still has elements of that sort of old era. Like I said, a little more subdued, but it is quite long-winded. You know, I don't know how else to describe it. You know, that's just kind of their style. Again, they're a little more eclectic, a little more of a thinking man's kind of thing. It's a little more poetic. It's a little more just kind of strung along. You know, it's a ride you really have to be prepared to take if you're going to get to Catatonia. I think if you're going to get into the more sort of this era, I will go with Dead End Kings or this one to start out with. If this is something you think you might want to explore and that you might be into. You know, I'm not a stranger to slow music or long-winded kind of stuff at all. You know, it's just that this is Catatonia, and I was just used to a certain kind of vibe from them. And in the year 2009, when this came out, I was just not prepared for it. You know, my mind was in a different state. You know, but going back now, I enjoyed this quite a bit simply because of its transition album kind of status. You know, again, I like the mix of, you know, what they have going on here, and I think the album art perfectly captures, you know, just what this sounds like, and they just nailed it with that. So, yeah, so Catatonia, Night is the New Day. I was disappointed at first, again, coming from the more punchier stuff. But, you know, over time and in proximity with the later material, going back to this, you know, I appreciate it now for what it is. I just wish they would have put out one more album that was kind of more like this. I like Dead End Kings. I don't love it, but I do enjoy it. But I kind of like this one just a little more for what it is. So, Catatonia, Night is the New Day. Okay, another change in direction. So, if you guys have been following my channel, you know, I don't only talk about metal. However, you may know these albums. So why am I showing these? Chances are that if you're a metalhead, you probably have these albums in your collection, at least one of them. And they're very cherished, and I think they're very pivotal for their time and very influential. So then comes Audioslave in 2002. So on paper, you're thinking, well, okay, you have the vocal fucking strengths and talent of Chris Cornell, and you have the sort of hard-hitting riffage of a band like Rage Against the Machine. So I remember when the press release came out and thinking, there's two ways you can go about it. It's going to be a gigantic mess, or it's the most awesome thing since, pre-sliced bread. So when the first single came out, which I think was Cochise, and I hesitated to hit play because I knew that, I loved Soundgarden, and, it's just that this band, Rage Against the Machine, very influential for me and very politically driven and, hard-hitting lyrics, It wasn't the most groundbreaking thing in the world. Punk bands were doing it. Hardcore bands already kind of hitting this kind of material when this came out. But, I was not listening to those bands when this came out, and this was the more, I guess, accessible one to me at the time. And it had more of that funky elements. And so, in my mind, I'm picturing Chris Cornell with that funky elements. But without, the Kim on guitars, it said we have Morello, right? And, like, how is this going to work? And I think the way they tried to sort of save grace was right from the get-go, they went, total radio rock. They were not trying to do anything sort of outside weird or outside of the bounds of what general top 40 audiences would be looking for. So how do you put out a good record, and still, kind of, because again, these guys were superstars at the time. Who put this out? Epic put this out, which is part of Sony, right? Yeah, big ass label. You're gonna sign with something like this, and with these kind of names on board, you're gonna have to make those sales, and these songs have to be catchy and kind of formulaic in some form. But these guys have proven themselves. But I think by the time Soundgarden and Rage Against the Machine were putting out their later albums, they were already on their downhill slope, more or less. I know Soundgarden pretty much took that long hiatus. We weren't sure if they were broken up yet. And Rage Against the Machine, Zach left. So then we had those guys kind of a bit of I don't know, just kind of wavered, wondered what the hell to do. So when Audioslave came on board, I don't think I gave it a fair chance in the beginning. I was thinking, what the hell is this? This is, to me, this was an amalgamation of watered down Rage Against the Machine, because it didn't have the hard hitting kind of I guess a more dimensional lyric kind of structure, and you didn't have the more interesting sort of psychedelic and other kind of stuff going on that Soundgarden was doing. With Kim on guitars, sort of leading up with Chris's vocals. Instead, we had Morello doing all the other weird kind of just gadgetry, that he usually does with this. It was more simplistic, more direct. And it's funny because on my last one, talking about Catatonia, I wanted something punchier, right? Compared to Night's a New Day, And, I kind of get my wish with this, as far as more direct, kind of, just punchier. But in my eyes, it was just too structural, too radio rock. The songs were bad, Like a Stone, Gasoline, Show Me How to Live. Those were all made for radio. So with Audioslave, I don't know, man. It all kind of fell together, and maybe that was part of my problem. I wanted to be more surprised, and so looking at their catalog, I think they released about 2-3 more albums after this, something like that, and this has since disbanded. But going back now, I think this is my favorite one in the catalog. Probably the one I reach more for. I think that over time, Soundgarden's gotten back together, put out one more album. Unfortunately, before everything happened with Chris. But with this, I now have another sense of appreciation. I do enjoy this album actually quite a bit. If I want something more radio rock kind of stuff, I think that, and there are times to take a break from fucking metal and everything else, and I just want to listen to a little more mainstream. This definitely scratches that itch. But at the time, I did not give it a fair chance because I wanted something more along these lines. And this was a time when the band was really hungry. They were really hungry, and, really looking to the next tier, the next level. Here, they started off from that top level already. They weren't this hungry band, that I've grown to love, The names were there, but I don't know. I guess it was just too predictable for me and just kind of fell in place. I was just like, okay. But you know what? I've loosened up on that. I don't have that kind of attitude about it anymore. Looking at it for what it is, I had to learn to separate those kind of biases. That was very hard for me. I eventually did. And you know what? This is just a great rock album. That's kind of the way I can't look at it as another kind of Soundgarden-esque or Rage Against the Machine-esque kind of album. I have to kind of remove those elements in my mind as that kind of band. Just look at it for just this particular unit of guys coming together, just kind of putting together a good rock album. And it is. It's not for everybody, especially if you're, a guttural, die-hard metalhead. But if you can enjoy something like this, it's actually a really good album. Again, but to me, this is probably the strongest thing they put out the gate. And I think as their sequential albums came out, it was a little more watered down for me. So I don't visit those albums at all, or very little. But the debut, just out of Audioslave, it's actually a good album. So definitely check it out. So those were my picks for this contest episode of The Dreadful Minutes. I appreciate you all hanging on and once again listening to me ramble on. This is an opinions episode, and so everybody's entitled to their own. And I really enjoyed watching everybody else's entry. This was a really cool topic to go with, Pat. So really cool that you did this, and make sure you're subbed to his channel, just overall. So again, like I said in the beginning, most of you probably already are. So, but I'll just leave a link to the original contest video. And good luck to everybody. And because he's giving away some cool shit. There's one particular item he's giving away, which is actually ended up being something that I sent him. So if I do win, maybe just something we can work out. But it's been fun. So keep it dreadful, y'all.